The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Willowbrook as Sarah Beth Hartwell made her way to the general store, her face partially hidden beneath the wide brim of her bonnet. 3 years had passed since the fire that changed everything. 3 years of whispered conversations that fell silent when she entered a room and pitying glances that cut deeper than any flame ever could. The scars that mapped the left side of her face told a story of courage and sacrifice, but in this small frontier town, they spoke only of damaged goods and dashed hopes. She stood at the edge of the crowd gathered for the monthly mail, order bride arrival, watching as eager bachelors stepped forward to claim their promised wives. The women, fresh-faced and hopeful, descended from the coach with nervous smiles and carefully packed trunks. Sarah Beth remembered when she had been one of them, arriving in Willowbrook with her own dreams of marriage and motherhood. That was before the fire, before the whispers, before she became the woman no one wanted. The last bride stepped down, a pretty blonde with rosy cheeks who was immediately swept up by the blacksmith. As the crowd dispersed, Sarah Beth turned to leave, but a voice stopped her cold. Miss Hartwell. Thomas Morrison, the town's self-appointed matchmaker, approached with his usual mixture of pity and determination. I've received another inquiry about you. A rancher up north widowed with 2 young children. He's not particular about appearances. Sarah Beth's stomach clenched. She had endured this conversation too many times before. Men who would consider her only out of desperation, who saw her as a last resort when no other woman would have them. She had been introduced to alcoholics, cruel men with violent tempers, and those who made it clear they expected nothing more than a housekeeper who wouldn't complain about their circumstances. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison, but I'm not interested," she replied, her voice steady despite the familiar ache in her chest. "Sarah Beth, you need to be practical. You're 25 now, and your options are becoming limited. This man has a good ranch, steady income." I said no. She turned and walked away, leaving Morrison shaking his head behind her. The walk back to her small boarding house room gave Sarah Beth time to wrestle with the familiar demons that haunted her. She earned her keep by taking in sewing and mending, her skilled fingers working magic on torn fabric, even as her scarred face kept customers from visiting her directly. They left their work with Mrs. Patterson, the boarding house owner, and picked it up the same way, as if Sarah Beth were some shameful secret to be hidden away. As she climbed the stairs to her room, she heard the thundering of hooves outside. Through the window, she watched a lone rider dismount from a magnificent chestnut horse. The man was tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and clothes that spoke of long days on the range. He moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. But Sarah Beth noticed something else, a pronounced limp in his left leg and a jagged scar that ran from his temple down to his jaw. The stranger tied his horse to the post and walked toward the general store. Sarah Beth found herself watching until he disappeared from view, wondering what had brought another scarred soul to Willowbrook. She didn't have to wonder long. The next morning, Mrs. Patterson knocked on her door with unusual excitement. "Sarah Beth, dear, there's a gentleman downstairs asking to speak with you. A Mr. Jake Brennan. He says Thomas Morrison gave him your name." Sarah Beth's heart sank. Another desperate man seeking a convenient arrangement. She almost refused to see him, but something in Mrs. Patterson's eyes made her reconsider. The older woman had been kind to her when others weren't, and Sarah Beth didn't want to seem ungrateful. "Tell him I'll be down shortly," she said, reaching for her bonnet to shadow her face. Jake Brennan stood when she entered the parlor, his hat in his hands. Up close, she could see that his scar was even more prominent than she had realized from her window, a stark white line against his tanned skin. His eyes, though, were kind, a deep brown that reminded her of rich coffee. "Miss Hartwell, thank you for agreeing to see me. I'm Jake Brennan. I own the Broken Arrow Ranch about 20 miles north of here." "Mr. Brennan." She inclined her head slightly, keeping her damaged side turned away. "Mr. Morrison mentioned you have children. 2. Emma's 8, and little Ben just turned 5. They lost their mother 2 years ago to fever, and they need a woman's touch. Someone who understands what it means to face hardship and come through it." Sarah Beth studied him carefully. He wasn't looking at her with pity or calculation like the others had. His gaze was direct but respectful, and when she turned slightly and he caught sight of her scars, his expression didn't change. "I should be honest with you, Mr. Brennan. I'm not what most men consider suitable wife material. I'm damaged goods, as they say around here." Jake's jaw tightened. Miss Hartwell, if you don't mind me saying so, anyone who judges your worth by your appearance isn't worth your consideration. I've seen real damage in my time, and it's not what shows on the outside. Something in his voice made her look at him more closely. There was pain there, deep and old, that went far beyond physical scars. May I ask what happened to you? She found herself asking, surprising them both. He was quiet for a long moment, then sat down heavily in the chair across from her. I was at Shiloh, caught shrapnel from an artillery shell. Tore up my face and leg pretty good. When I came home, my fiancée took one look at me and decided she couldn't bear to be seen with such a sight. Said I wasn't the man she fell in love with anymore. The raw honesty in his admission took Sarah Beth's breath away. She sat down across from him, forgetting for a moment to hide her face. I'm sorry. That must have been devastating. It was. But it also taught me something important about what real love looks like. It's not about perfect faces or unmarked skin. It's about choosing someone every day, through whatever life brings. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Sarah Beth spoke again. What happened to me? There was a fire at my family's farm. I got my younger brother out, but the roof collapsed while I was going back for our cat. Foolish, really, but I was 22 and thought I was invincible. You saved your brother's life. Yes, but I lost everything else. My parents died in that fire. My intended husband decided he couldn't marry someone so disfigured. I came here hoping for a fresh start, but... She gestured vaguely at her surroundings. But small towns have long memories and short tolerances for anything different. Exactly. Jake leaned forward slightly. Miss Hartwell, I'm not going to pretend this would be a conventional courtship. I'm offering you a partnership, a chance for both of us to build something better than what we've had alone. My children need a mother, and I need someone who understands that a person's worth isn't measured by their appearance. I think we might be able to help each other. Sarah Beth felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in years, hope. But caution held her back. What exactly are you proposing? Come to the ranch with me. Meet Emma and Ben. See if you think you could make a life there. If not, I'll bring you back to town. No questions asked. If yes, well, we can see where it leads. The offer was more generous than any she had received, but Sarah Beth had learned to be wary of things that seemed too good to be true. Why me? Surely there are other women who would jump at the chance to marry a successful rancher. Jake's smile was rueful. Miss Hartwell, take a good look at me. I'm 32 years old, scarred, and limping around on a bad leg. I have 2 grieving children and a ranch that demands 18-hour days. Most women looking for a husband want someone who can dance at socials and escort them to church picnics. I need someone who can see past the surface and help me build a real family. The honesty in his words convinced her more than any flattery could have. Sarah Beth found herself nodding slowly. I'd like to meet your children, Mr. Brennan. When would you like to leave? How about tomorrow morning? I can arrange for a wagon so you'll be comfortable on the journey. That evening, Sarah Beth packed her few belongings with hands that trembled slightly. Mrs. Patterson helped, chattering nervously about the wisdom of going off with a stranger. But Sarah Beth had made up her mind. Whatever lay ahead couldn't be worse than the slow death of loneliness she was experiencing in Willowbrook. The journey to the Broken Arrow Ranch took most of the day, winding through rolling hills dotted with cattle and horses. Jake proved to be an easy traveling companion, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the land. He didn't try to make conversation when she seemed lost in thought, and he didn't stare at her scars when she turned her face toward him. As the sun began to set, they crested a hill and Sarah Beth got her first view of the Broken Arrow Ranch. The main house was larger than she had expected, built of sturdy timber with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Outbuildings were scattered around the property, and she could see cattle grazing in the distance. It looked prosperous and well maintained, but there was something indefinably sad about it, as if the life had gone out of it along with Jake's wife. 2 small figures burst from the house as they approached, running toward the wagon with shouts of joy. Jake's face transformed when he saw his children, the worry lines smoothing away and his eyes lighting up with genuine happiness. Papa, Papa. The little boy Ben reached them first, his chubby legs carrying him as fast as they could. Emma followed more sedately, but her face was bright with excitement. Jake climbed down from the wagon and scooped Ben up in his arms, then reached out to tussle Emma's dark hair. Did you 2 behave for Mrs. Rodriguez while I was gone? Yes. Papa, Emma said solemnly. But Ben tried to feed the chickens cookies again. They looked hungry. Ben protested, and Sarah Beth found herself smiling despite her nervousness. Jake set Ben down and turned to help Sarah Beth from the wagon. Children, I'd like you to meet Miss Sarah Beth Hartwell. She's come to visit us for a while. Emma stepped forward politely. Pleased to meet you, Miss Sarah Beth. Her eyes lingered on Sarah Beth's scars for just a moment, but without the usual horror or pity. Children Sarah Beth had found were often more accepting than adults. Ben, meanwhile, had no such reservations. He walked right up to Sarah Beth and took her hand. Are you going to stay with us? Mrs. Rodriguez makes terrible biscuits, and Papa burns everything. Ben, Emma scolded, but she was trying not to giggle. It's quite all right, Sarah Beth said, kneeling down to Ben's level. I do know how to make biscuits, and I promise they're better than terrible ones. Will you make some tonight? Ben asked hopefully. Sarah Beth looked up at Jake, who was watching the interaction with something that looked like relief. If your father doesn't mind, I'd be happy to. The next few days passed in a blur of domestic activity. Sarah Beth found herself falling easily into the rhythms of ranch life. She cooked meals that were actually edible, mended clothes with skill that amazed even the ranch hands, and most importantly, began to build relationships with Emma and Ben. Emma, she discovered, was a serious child who had taken on too much responsibility after her mother's death. She helped with household tasks that should have been handled by adults and worried constantly about taking care of her father and brother. Sarah Beth gently began to take some of that burden from her small shoulders, encouraging Emma to play and be a child again. Ben was easier in many ways, open and affectionate with the natural resilience of the very young. He seemed to accept Sarah Beth's presence without question, climbing into her lap while she read stories and chattering about everything that crossed his mind. Jake, meanwhile, proved to be a complex man. He was unfailingly kind and respectful, but Sarah Beth could see the weight of responsibility he carried. He worked from before dawn until well after dark, managing the ranch, caring for his children, and trying to be everything to everyone. She began to understand why he needed a partner rather than just a wife. It was on her 5th day at the ranch that everything changed. Sarah Beth was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard shouts from outside. Through the window, she saw Jake running toward the horse corral, his limp more pronounced than usual as he pushed himself harder than his injured leg could handle. She rushed outside to find chaos. A spooked stallion had gotten loose and was rearing and striking at anyone who came near. Emma was pressed against the corral fence, clearly terrified, while several ranch hands circled the animal warily. Emma climbed up to pet the horses. One of the hands called to Jake. That stallion don't like strangers, boss. We can't get close enough to get her out of there. Sarah Beth could see the problem immediately. Emma was trapped between the fence and the enraged horse, too frightened to move. The stallion was between her and the gate, and every time someone tried to approach, he became more agitated. Without thinking, Sarah Beth pushed through the circle of men and climbed over the fence. She heard Jake shout her name, but she ignored him, focusing entirely on the horse and the frightened child. Easy, boy, she murmured, holding her hands out slowly. Nobody wants to hurt you. The stallion's ears flickered toward her voice, but he continued to pace and snort. Sarah Beth had grown up around horses on her family's farm, and she remembered her father's lessons about reading their body language. Emma, honey, I need you to stay very still, she said quietly, never taking her eyes off the horse. I'm going to come get you, but you have to trust me, okay? I'm scared, Emma whispered. I know, sweetheart, but you're brave. You're the bravest little girl I know. Step by step, Sarah Beth moved closer to the stallion, speaking in low, soothing tones. The horse watched her warily, but something in her calm demeanor seemed to reach him. When she was close enough, she slowly extended her hand, letting him catch her scent. That's it, beautiful boy. You don't want to hurt anyone, do you? You're just scared too. The stallion's nostrils flared as he investigated her hand, and gradually his aggressive posture began to relax. Sarah Beth took another careful step, then another until she was close enough to Emma to reach out and pull the child against her side. Now we're going to walk very slowly to the gate, she whispered to Emma. Stay close to me and keep your movements small. It seemed to take forever, but finally they reached the gate. Jake was there immediately, lifting Emma over the fence and then helping Sarah Beth climb out. The moment they were safe, the ranch hands moved in to secure the stallion. Jake pulled both Sarah Beth and Emma into a fierce embrace, his whole body shaking. "Don't you ever scare me like that again," he said roughly. "Other of you." Emma was crying now, the terror of the situation finally hitting her. "I just wanted to see the pretty horses," she sobbed. "I didn't mean to make him angry." "I know, sweetheart," Sarah Beth soothed, stroking the child's hair. "You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes animals get scared just like people do." That evening, after the children were in bed, Jake found Sarah Beth sitting on the porch, looking out at the star-filled sky. "I owe you my daughter's life," he said quietly, settling into the chair beside her. "You don't owe me anything. Anyone would have done the same thing." No, they wouldn't have. Most people would have been too frightened, or they wouldn't have known how to handle the horse. "Where did you learn to do that?" "My father bred horses before the fire. He always said that horses could sense fear, but they could also sense kindness. That stallion wasn't mean, just scared and protecting his territory." Jake was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah Beth, I want you to know that what you did today, it showed me the kind of person you really are. Someone who would risk her own safety for a frightened child, who could see past a dangerous situation to the heart of what was really happening." "I care about Emma and Ben," she admitted, "more than I expected to in such a short time. And they care about you. Emma told me tonight that she hoped you would stay forever. She said you make her feel safe." Sarah Beth felt tears prick her eyes. When was the last time anyone had said she made them feel safe? For so long, she had been the one people turned away from, the reminder of life's fragility and cruelty. "Jake, I need to be honest with you about something. I'm not looking for a marriage of convenience or a business arrangement. If we move forward with this, I want it to be real. I want a partnership built on genuine affection and respect, not just mutual need." Jake reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "Sarah Beth, I stopped believing in fairy tale romance a long time ago. But what I saw in you today, what I've been seeing all week, that's better than any fairy tale. That's real love. The kind that shows up when it matters, that puts others before yourself, that sees beauty where others see flaws." He lifted their joined hands and gently kissed her scarred knuckles. "If you'll have me, if you'll have us, I promise to spend every day trying to be worthy of what you're offering." Sarah Beth looked into his eyes and saw her future reflected there. Not perfect, not without challenges, but real and full of possibility. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll stay." 3 months later, Sarah Beth stood in the small church in Willowbrook, wearing a simple but beautiful dress she had sewn herself. Jake waited for her at the altar, handsome in his Sunday best, his scars and hers no longer marks of shame but badges of survival and strength. Emma and Ben stood beside them, Emma holding a bouquet of wildflowers and Ben trying his best to stand still despite his excitement. The church was fuller than Sarah Beth had expected. Ranch hands from the Broken Arrow, neighbors who had come to know and respect her, and even some of the women from town who had heard about her heroic rescue of Emma. As she walked down the aisle, Sarah Beth caught sight of Thomas Morrison in one of the pews. He nodded at her respectfully, perhaps finally understanding that true worth couldn't be measured by unmarked skin or conventional beauty. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When Jake promised to love her in sickness and in health, for better or worse, Sarah Beth knew he meant every word. When she promised the same, she felt the last of her old fears and insecurities fall away. They were both scarred, both imperfect, both carrying the weight of loss and disappointment. But together, they had found something precious, a love that had been tested by life and chosen to endure. As they kissed to seal their union, Sarah Beth heard Emma giggle and Ben cheer. The sound filled her heart to overflowing. She had come to Willowbrook as a woman no one wanted, convinced her scars had ruined any chance of happiness. But she was leaving as a wife and mother, beloved by people who saw her true worth. The reception at the ranch was a joyous affair, with music and dancing under the stars. Sarah Beth watched Jake swing Emma around in a circle while Ben clapped his hands with delight, and she knew she had found her place in the world at last. Later, as they stood on the porch of what was now truly their home, Jake pulled her close and whispered in her ear, "Thank you for taking a chance on a scarred cowboy and his children." Sarah Beth smiled, no longer bothering to hide her face in the shadows. "Thank you for seeing past the scars to the woman underneath." "Those aren't scars," Jake said, tracing the marks on her cheek with gentle fingers. "They're proof of your courage, your love for others, your willingness to sacrifice for what matters." They're beautiful because they're part of you. As they stood together in the moonlight, Sarah Beth realized that sometimes the most beautiful love stories weren't about perfect people finding each other. Sometimes they were about broken people choosing to heal together, building something stronger and more precious than anything they could have created alone. The wind rustled through the grass, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the promise of tomorrow. Sarah Beth Brennan closed her eyes and listened to the sound of her family's laughter drifting from inside the house, finally understanding that she had found everything she had ever dreamed of. Not despite her scars, but because they had led her to the people who could see her true beauty. In the distance, a night bird called out across the prairie, its song a melody of hope carried on the evening breeze. Sarah Beth smiled and squeezed her husband's hand, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, scarred but unbroken, imperfect but deeply loved, exactly as they were meant to be. The years that followed brought their share of hardships and joys. There were harsh winters when the cattle struggled to survive, and drought years when the grass turned brown and brittle. There were moments of doubt and disagreement, times when the weight of responsibility seemed too heavy to bear. But through it all, Sarah Beth and Jake faced each challenge as partners, their love deepening with each trial overcome. Emma grew into a confident young woman who inherited her stepmother's courage and her father's determination. She never forgot the day Sarah Beth had risked her life to save her from the stallion, and she carried that lesson of selfless love into her own relationships. Ben became a skilled horseman and rancher, learning from both his father's expertise and Sarah Beth's gentle wisdom about reading the hearts of both animals and people. The ranch prospered under their joint care. Sarah Beth's keen eye for detail and Jake's knowledge of the land created a partnership that was admired throughout the territory. They added rooms to the house as their family grew, not with more children of their own, but with the countless people who found refuge and acceptance at the Broken Arrow Ranch. Word spread about the scarred woman who could gentle the wildest horses and the wounded cowboy who saw beauty where others saw only damage. Young people who felt like outcasts, veterans struggling to find their place in a peacetime world, women fleeing difficult circumstances, all found their way to the ranch, drawn by stories of a place where scars were seen as marks of survival rather than shame. Sarah Beth established a small school on the ranch property, teaching not only reading and writing but also practical skills like sewing, cooking, and animal husbandry. She had learned that education was the greatest gift she could give to those who, like herself, had been written off by society. Her classroom became a place where differences were celebrated rather than hidden, where every student was valued for their unique contributions. Jake, meanwhile, became known throughout the territory as a fair man who judged others by their character rather than their appearance or background. He hired hands that other ranchers wouldn't consider. Men with prison records who deserved a second chance, immigrants struggling to establish themselves in a new land, and anyone else willing to work hard and treat others with respect. The town of Willowbrook gradually changed as well. The influence of the Brennan family, as they came to be known, rippled outward from the ranch. Thomas Morrison, the former matchmaker, began to reconsider his approach to helping lonely hearts find each other. Instead of focusing on conventional attractions, he started to look deeper, seeking to match people based on shared values and complementary strengths. Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house became one of Sarah Beth's closest friends, often visiting the ranch and marveling at the transformation she witnessed. The shy, hidden woman who had once sown in solitude had become a confident matriarch whose wisdom was sought by people from miles around. On their 10th wedding anniversary, the entire territory seemed to celebrate with them. The ranch hosted a gathering that lasted 3 days, with music, dancing, and storytelling that continued well into each night. People came from hundreds of miles away, many of them former visitors to the ranch who had gone on to build their own successful lives. As Sarah Beth stood on the porch during the celebration, watching Jake dance with Emma while Ben played his fiddle, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The fire that had scarred her face had seemed like the end of her story, but it had actually been the beginning of something far more beautiful than she could have imagined. A young woman approached her, someone Sarah Beth didn't recognize. The girl was perhaps 18, with a withered arm that she tried to hide beneath her shawl. Her eyes held the same mixture of hope and fear that Sarah Beth remembered feeling so keenly. Mrs. Brennan, The girl said quietly, "I heard about you in town. About how you found happiness despite." She gestured vaguely at her own disability. Sarah Beth smiled and gently pulled the girl's shawl away from her arm. "What's your name?" "Dear, Mary Collins. I came out here with my family, but there's no place for someone like me. No man will have a crippled wife, and I can't do the work that other women can." "Mary," Sarah Beth said firmly, "let me tell you something I wish someone had told me years ago. Your worth isn't determined by what others think you can't do. It's determined by what you choose to do with the gifts you have. That arm of yours may be different, but I'm willing to bet your heart is strong, your mind is sharp, and your spirit is unbroken." She gestured toward the celebration around them. "Every person here has a story of overcoming something. Some of their struggles show on the outside, some don't. But what matters is that they didn't let their challenges define their limits." Mary's eyes filled with tears. "But how do you find someone who can see past the imperfections?" Sarah Beth looked across the yard at Jake, who caught her eye and smiled, his own scars clearly visible in the lantern light, but somehow making him more handsome rather than less. "You don't find someone who sees past your imperfections, Mary. You find someone who sees your imperfections as part of what makes you perfectly yourself. Someone who understands that real beauty comes from courage, kindness, and the strength to keep going when life gets hard." The conversation with Mary stayed with Sarah Beth long after the anniversary celebration ended. She realized that her story had become something larger than just her own journey. It had become a beacon of hope for others who felt cast aside by society's narrow definitions of worth and beauty. She began writing letters to newspapers throughout the territory, sharing her experiences and encouraging others to look beyond surface appearances when judging their fellow human beings. Her words reached people in distant towns and cities, sparking conversations about acceptance, worth, and the true nature of love. Years passed, and the Broken Arrow Ranch became legendary throughout the West. It was known not just for its successful cattle operation, but as a place where the broken could become whole, where the rejected could find acceptance, where love was measured not by conventional standards, but by depth of character and strength of spirit. Jake's hair grew gray at the temples, and his limp became more pronounced with age, but his love for Sarah Beth only grew stronger. He often told visitors that marrying her was the smartest thing he had ever done, not because she had made his life easier, but because she had made it infinitely richer. Sarah Beth's scars faded somewhat over the years, but they never disappeared entirely. She no longer tried to hide them, wearing them instead as badges of honor that represented her journey from despair to hope, from rejection to acceptance, from loneliness to love. Emma married a young doctor who had spent time at the ranch recovering from his own war wounds, and they established a practice that served the entire territory with compassion and skill. Ben took over more of the ranch operations as Jake aged, proving to be a worthy successor who had inherited both his father's business acumen and his stepmother's gift for seeing the best in people. On quiet evenings, Sarah Beth and Jake would sit on their porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. They would talk about their day, their children, their dreams for the future, and sometimes they would simply sit in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, hearts full. The woman who had once believed she was too damaged for love had discovered that the deepest love often grows from the richest soil of shared struggle and mutual understanding. The cowboy who had thought his scars made him unworthy of happiness had learned that true worth comes from the courage to offer one's heart despite the risk of rejection. Together, they had built something beautiful. Not despite their scars, but because of them. Their imperfections had become the foundation of a love story that inspired countless others to believe in second chances, to look beyond surface appearances, and to understand that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with two broken people choosing to heal together. As the stars emerged in the darkening sky, Sarah Beth squeezed Jake's hand and whispered the same words she had spoken on their wedding night years before. "Thank you for seeing past the scars to the woman underneath." And Jake, as he had every night since, replied, "Thank you for showing me that scars are just proof we survived something that tried to break us. They make us stronger, not weaker. They make us beautiful, not damaged." In the distance, that same night bird called across the prairie. It sung a melody of hope and healing that seemed to carry their love story on the evening breeze, inspiring others to believe that true love sees not with the eyes, but with the heart.